Hello, my name is Eva Slesness, and my topic for today is African Americans' workforce experience during the Industrial Revolution. General background. The Industrial Revolution that I will specifically be covering today is the second American Industrial Revolution, which happened between the late 19th to early 20th century. This industrial revolution was characterized by the economic growth through drastic work adaptation/change through technology. The first American industrial revolution happened due to the cotton gin, due to that type of new technology that created a cotton boom in the South and a lot of economic prosperity. The second industrial revolution that I will be covering was specifically created due to the steel press, which allowed for the molding and shaping of steel and manufacturing to be a lot more efficient, and it created a boom in basically railways and all this stuff that generated a lot of economic prosperity and a lot more tools and such that were used to create jobs. In the early 20th century, America was going through their second industrial revolution, with small artisan farmer suppliers changing into industrial factories that increased the means of production. We have a picture right here of black children that worked in the Alexandria glass factories in Virginia in 1911. So these are industrial revolution black workers. Before the Industrial Revolution, the second one, black people were grueling enduring through the Civil War Reconstruction era, which failed to establish true racial equality despite the 15th and 14th Amendment. In the book From Slavery to Freedom by Franklin and Higginbotham, the text states white supremacists resorted to every legal and extra legal maneuver to deny blacks political equality. Secret societies grew and spread when it became apparent to Southerners that their control was to be broken by radical Reconstruction. Franklin and Higginbotham, 256. The tools of white supremacy shifted from overt acts of slavery to disenfranchisement and more institutional acts of racism and discrimination, a more reserved yet just as prominent act of racial hierarchy. An example could be that blacks were given the right to vote in the late 19th century, but few did due to the threats of violence. And some white employers even forced their black workers to vote in favor of Democratic conservatives. It was just basically a new form of disenfranchisement, if that makes any sense. In basically near the beginning of not the beginning, well, yeah, the beginning of the early 20th century, became extremely established that the color line basically became more prominent and more known, and the advancement of Jim Crow did basically continue on. And basically, the suppression of black political power, such as voting and running for office, was a theme before the second wave of the Industrial Revolution. Key events that I will be covering. I will be covering the Great Migration, the work experience, and black economic growth. The Great Migration. The Great Migration is one of the largest known migration efforts in American history, in which over 6 million black Americans migrated, as stated by an article titled The Great Migration 1910 to 1970 by Megan Cunningham, produced through the Governmental Archives. They migrated from the south and up into northern states looking for economic and social relief. The Great Migration was seen as a threat to white Americans due to black workers being seen as cheap laborers that would steal their jobs. European immigrants often were violent with blacks due to this and the job market, and as a way to be accepted by their white American peers. These factors increased racial tensions to a boiling point, as can be known through the Red Summer, and as shown also through the Chicago race riots, which started through the death of Eugene Williams, which created a riot that lasted for 7 days. Many people were gruelly killed, injured, and over $200,000 of property was destroyed through the burning of black neighborhoods. There are many, many accounts of white Europeans creating very, very violent acts during this specific riot, and it could be seen as a way to basically them adhere to the racial hierarchy in hopes that they themselves would receive less discrimination during that time period. Trains were the lifeblood of the Great Migration through the boom of steel manufacturing stuff through the steel press. New railways and rail carts were created and basically created this wave of networks and where migration was extremely easy by train, and which helped produce and fuel the Great Migration. The work experience. Black workers, many of which migrated to the North, experienced discrimination through being underpaid, receiving poor work conditions, and being barred from white unions. Black workers were also more prone to layoffs and housing discrimination due to their race and the influx of blacks being seen as a threat to white sovereignty. Thomas Maloney, a researcher at the University of Utah, compiled data based off census reports from the 19th and 20th century on the economic, educational, and social life of Black Americans. And he states their unemployment rates in northern cities were much higher than white unemployment rates in the same cities. One result of Black migration then was a dramatic increase in the ratio of Black unemployment to the white unemployment. Maloney. Poor conditions basically could be seen as blacks migrated. Their stance in these cities and stuff, they were seen as a threat, and so many people were, to say the least, it created a lot of racial tension. And they received less complex and more dangerous jobs as well. This could be specifically seen in Chicago in meatpacking plants. Many blacks were specifically put in far more dangerous sections of the meatpacking plant, such as the cutting and processing of meat and the killing of animals. There have been numerous reports of people losing fingers and such, and blacks were mostly put into those types of dangerous situations and jobs. They were also received less complex jobs. For instance, in one account, if a black builder or basically white builders would lay out the brick for to establish a home or a foundation or something like that, while blacks would bring the grit or the cement that ties the brick together. They would basically receive less complex jobs through their employers because they would be seen like not as adequate. The work experience, union discrimination. The Industrial Revolution is notorious for its lack of regulations and abuse towards workers for the means of profit. This particularly can be seen towards black workers. Unions and strikes were seen as one of the last safeguards for workers to take their power back, but for blacks it was often used as a tool to further discriminate and abuse them. Blacks were often barred from white unions, and some strikes that took place targeted black workers, blaming the employment of hiring them instead of white workers. An example of this can be seen in the Brotherhood of Locomotive Firemen and Engineering 1909 strike, where they literally walked off of their jobs specifically in protest of black workers being there, seeing and blaming the employer for hiring black workers and believing that instead that they should fire the black workers and hired paying white workers instead. Again, the sentiment of they're stealing our jobs and stuff like that that even echoes even to today's standards, sadly. Black economic growth. Black owned businesses and corporations began to gain traction, specifically in the Industrial Revolution. This could be seen as prominent black banks coming into existence, the NBL, and also Madam C.J. Walker's success as a black woman entrepreneur. Her specific success was based of her seeing a non-existent market for black beauty products and her basically taking a stand and creating these products which elevated her status into high class. What is it? There's also black economic opportunities that grew and generally quality of life increased from the late 19th century, though was obviously still seen or on a lesser means compared to their white counterparts. Okay. As stated before, I'll be using the same source with Maloney. Maloney states that by 1990, the economic conditions of African Americans had changed dramatically. They had become much less concentrated in the South in rural places and in farming jobs, and had entered the better blue collar jobs in the white collar sector. They were nearly twice as likely to own their own homes at the end of the century as in the 1900s, and their rates of school attendance at all ages had risen sharply. Basically, you could see this black economic growth through also basically the migration because it provided so many opportunities through the Industrial Revolution. Black economic growth was also pushed with the self-help philosophy in the black community, leading many black consumers to rely on their black producers to grow their own institutions. And this was also influenced by the self-help philosophy with the evolution of black success in civil rights also being seen through the lens of black separatism. Basically, you can only rely on yourself, and there was a disconnection from whites. We could see Madam C.J. Walker going on a sightseeing tour. The relevance and significance of this topic. The impact that the Industrial Revolution had on shaping societal and economic outlook of the black community in the early 20th century cannot be understated. In the early 20th century, it basically during the Industrial Revolution, the groundworks for the social and heightened economic success of the black community basically set up the base level for what the civil rights movement would be pushed upon, if that makes any sense. They basically set up the groundwork for what it could be built upon with the Montgomery bus boycotts and stuff like that. With those institutions and political activism basically starting during the Industrial Revolution and building up to those points later on. The Industrial Revolution's economic growth, along with the heightened racial tensions, paved the way for black institutions to begin building and for black political activism to take root in a unified community that seeked out racial justice through legal and social battles. Yeah, it was definitely an extremely important point in the black community's history. Basically, it kind of gave them a jumping off point, if that makes any sense. And here are my sources. And thank you very much for listening to me. My name is Eva Slesness, and I hope you have a good day.